I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either going to be okay.
No, stop!
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
I'd have to say I have to just claim a little bit of credit here, because I was actually the first Western diver ever to dive it. No, I was the first Western diver to dive before the story began to really get out in the West. I actually learned to dive in 1996, and the reason that I learned to dive was because I'd been traveling in Japan extensively in 1996. And I had heard about these structures, and a photojournalist called Ken Shindo had shown me photographs that he'd taken underwater off the Okinawa island of Yonaguni, which is the most southwestern of all the Japanese islands, which showed this huge turret structure, very dramatic structure, deeply submerged underwater. And I decided I have absolutely got to do this. And I found that no Westerners, a number of Japanese had dived there, but no Westerners had ever taken an interest in it. So I decided to do that, and I learned to dive in 1996, and then started diving at Yonaguni in March of 1997, and since then I've put in more than 200 dives on the underwater structures around Yonaguni. They're very treacherous waters, and you see, for me, it started off with a sense of curiosity. What could this thing be? And developed into a need to explore the massively extensive site, because we've heard very little in the West about really how big and extraordinary the Yonaguni site is. So obviously, I cover it in depth in Underworld. That was my intention was to really show the complexity and the peculiarities of this site. The deepest parts that we have dived on go down to about 120 feet underwater. However, that doesn't mean that there are not deeper structures. We went there in '99 with a remotely operated vehicle, and we found other structures at much greater depth, which has not been possible to dive on yet. The whole area is just littered with extraordinary underwater ruins. And again, I mean, I'm sorry to keep on moaning about the scientists, but again, what science has done in response to the Yonaguni discoveries has been to try to dismiss them as purely natural, freak natural. They did the same thing with those blocks off Bimini, which I also re-examine in the book, because I think the so-called debunking of the Bimini Road is a classic example of really appalling science. It's not science at all. It's a pure instrumented prejudice designed to take our attention away from an interesting and intriguing possibility in the past. Well, the same so-called debunking exercise was mounted on Yonaguni. So I've made it my business to put together in a detailed and logical form all the evidence which proves that the whole complex of structures at Yonaguni are man-made, and that they go back more than 12,000 years. Smug attitude of we know everything on the part of mainstream science, which is then transferred to the public as though it were a fact. Actually, they don't know everything. They just think they know everything. And the only encouraging thing is the public are becoming increasingly tired of all this nonsense. www.grahamhancock.com. We have a message board on the site, and it's often a focus for around these issues. And it's the most curious thing that when my site started to become popular, immediately so-called debunking sites were set up to counteract it. And, I don't understand what all this energy is in so-called debunking.
Graham,
a few alternative ideas are put out there, and suddenly the establishment of academic history is crying that it's being attacked and that it's not fair and that the false view is being given of the past, whereas in fact, 70 or 80, perhaps 90% of all media output on the park is absolutely mainstream and orthodox. Any questions at all? Yeah, I mean, we need alternative ideas put forward, even if a lot of them are wrong.
Why?
That's what we need in our society is some encouragement inquiry. It's funded, and it's because powerful groups have an investment, an absolute investment in a passive, consuming public, which does not out-question in the simply consumed goods of mass production, and anything which threatens the passivity of the public and the inquiry into our past and what we are and where we came from does so to an extraordinary degree. And anything that threatens that status quo is crushed, and we've seen it again and again with ideas that have been put forward, and all kinds of dirty tricks they use, which suggest that the other side, if we may call them that, must have something that they're covering up or are afraid of. Sometimes I feel like a Shakespearean character is out of place in time, but that's and I don't think it's so much a following of me and my work. I think it's a new phenomenon in the world that people are, despite all the efforts being made to cage up in, that independent-minded people all around the world are thinking for themselves. That's exactly what will happen. One can only hope that this new spirit of inquiry continues to gather momentum. In my view, that could happen, and that somehow, that people will go on asking questions. The most insidious thing about modern society is the way that it progresses. Whatever the field is, whether it's medicine, whether it's physics, whether it's ancient history, our society conspired to persuade us that everything is already known about it, and that there's nothing new to discover. And that alternative ideas are not helpful. It's just the most extraordinary thing to say, and yet, unfortunately, it sums up the scientific aspect. So, we were talking sort of 3% or 4% of people thinking in a new way, but I would say it's also the case that we probably just use about 3% or 4% of our brain. I'm open to such ideas, because otherwise I find it very hard to explain. We have this we have this fantastic potential to imagine anything, and to reach out with our imaginations into the mystery of being alive, and the mystery of the soul and of the meaning of life and of life after death. These questions are within our potential to examine them, and yet modern society encourages us not only not to examine them, but also that they're not worth examining. Oh, definitely. Definitely. Organized science has without a doubt become the sad and miserable religion of the modern age. Ruined for what? For simply putting forward ideas that question the vision of the past. Yeah, and there's so much more to the story. I decided to... The story of Underworld is spread out all around the world, but one of the sites that I do visit and dive at and re-examine is the famous Bimini Road, because here is an example of an intriguing discovery, which was successfully written off by science almost 30 years ago. By the early 70s, the view had become so widespread that there was no point in doing further research at Bimini, that really hardly anybody did.